Where's that?
So you want me to just go, or you want?
I'm just going to introduce a little bit, and then we'll turn it over to you and Courtney. And why don't you just kind of.
Absolutely.
And then what I'm going to do is just turn it over to you, and then you could introduce Bob and Courtney.
Me and Sarah. Yep, and we'll get everybody in the room, just a quick go around and
Yeah,
where they're from.
Okay.
Okay, or is that part of your presentation?
I would do it, but if you do it, that's fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
All right.
Yep.
We'd like to just to bring this to order here, and we wanted to get started. And appreciate you coming. And we see some P&Z members out there. Good, good. We like to see some planning and zoning over here. And I think that just to get started on a little bit of economic development and where our potential is and where we're going. And I'd like to. I'm Bob Kasner, and I'm the chairman of Economic Development in East Haddam. This is Sue Smith. She is the vice chairman, and she has put this together. And Sue, I'm going to turn it over to you, and possibly you could introduce our speaker tonight.
All right, we're very lucky tonight to have the honor of being, as they told me, the 83rd town in Connecticut to do this presentation. We have Bob with the CERC, Courtney and Sarah. And so they'll be breaking it down into 3 presentations for us and such. And so if we want to just, since we know who they are, if we want to just go around the room real quick and let everybody know who you are and which entity you're with real quick, then Bob will get started.
I'm Jim Fenwa, and a member of the East Haddam. Emmett Lyman, first selectman.
Hi, I'm Pat Vance. I'm actually here with 2 different hats on tonight. The quick one is I live across the river in Chester. I'm on the EDC over there.
Oh, good.
I know, Bob. And one of the things I think will come up tonight, we've actually been working together regionally with some of the towns on both sides of the river, which I find very exciting. So that's one of my hats, but the primary one is I'm also your community relations and economic development representative for Eversource. So most of the time I'm here on community relations, where I'm a liaison for storms, power outages, tree removals, pretty much anything energy related. But one of the other hats that I wear for that role is economic development. So Eversource, beside being anything to do with energy, deliverer of services, we also offer energy efficiency programs for businesses to help reduce costs. I put some of the brochures out in the back. If you're interested, you can keep those and distribute them.
Excellent.
And then also we are a primary sponsor of the Connecticut Economic Resource Center. So, and this is another book in the back. We'll leave some of these for you, but we help publish this as well. So, and I'm sure Bob and Courtney will be talking about that. So, thank you.
Great, thank you.
I'm Judy Novi. I'm a resident of East Haddam and a business owner here in town, and I'm the treasurer of the East Haddam Business Association.
Bernie Gillis, Planning and Zoning. Thank you.
Louis Salacro, planning and zoning.
Tim Smith, husband.
That's his claim to fame.
First and foremost.
Yes.
And your timing is great, because everybody else has just introduced themselves.
Perfect. I'm Irene Haynes. I'm on the EDC.
Hi, Irene.
Hi, how are you?
And I'm Bob Santee from CERC.
Hi.
And I want to spend a couple of minutes
6 or 6?
following up on Pat's comments, because if you don't know anything about CERC, CERC is a public-private partnership that's 25 years old this year. And the partnership is between the state of Connecticut and the state's regulated utilities. And the utilities actually support CERC to quite a large degree, and Eversource, as the largest utility in the state, has provided the largest level of support, which I believe over that 25 years is well over $30 million.
Wow.
So we could not be here tonight doing this type of thing without the support we get from Eversource and the other utilities. And it was actually, I would say, just after Sandy, when there were some changes at Eversource, where our representatives from Eversource said, we'd like to do more for the municipalities of the state. And so we had been talking about creating a municipal practice. And we've now done that. Courtney, you met a few minutes ago, is the vice president in charge of that practice. And it led to this series. So, that's why we're out here doing this. It's because our utility supporters said it's really an important thing to help towns understand their role in economic development. And actually, I'll say one other thing about us. I'll say a lot about it as we go along, but right now I would like to say that we also do business recruitment for the state of Connecticut. We have representatives that are in country in Brazil and in Germany, and we've had a representative in Israel. And you might hear all the bad news about companies leaving Connecticut, but we've brought 26 companies to Connecticut over the last 2.5 years. Those are small companies. It's not going to take the place of GE, but you have to be conscious about this. You have to go out and do this in a strategic way, and that's what we're doing for the state. And the way we refer to that, of course, is if you're going to ask global companies to invest in Connecticut, then the towns need to be ready to welcome them, which means, is the regulatory process easy? Is the real estate available? Does it have the characteristics that someone is looking for? And that doesn't mean you have to do all of that in East Haddam, because we have 169 towns, but there are probably even foreign companies that would be interested in locating here. So it's just a way of thinking about, the whole range of activities that make up economic development. So let me just tell you what you're going to hear from us tonight. There are 3 elements to this presentation, and the first is, sort of what they call a common body of knowledge. When you were in college, they'd say, oh, well, everybody needs to start with a common body of knowledge, because if we don't have that, where are we going to take you? And so we have done some slides, and Sarah Fitznitz, who's here from CERC, will be going through that with you, and she'll tell you a little bit about the sources of the data and the discussion that we could have with you. The second is economic development. What is it and why it's important? Why should you care, I guess? That's the section that I will do, and try and give you a fairly high-level view of what economic development is at the state level, the regional level, the municipal level, how the pieces fit together or sometimes don't fit together. And then finally, Courtney, who has done this work in a number of places, will say, here are the roles and responsibilities of an economic development commission, economic development team in a town, and we can talk about how you prioritize that, because it's a very long list, and you're never going to be able to do all of it. One of the things we like to do to start is just ask you a couple of high-level questions so that we get a sense of what you think is really important about what's happening in your town. And Courtney is going to do that.
Hi, happy to be with all of you tonight. And especially here, Emmett and we had met maybe 2 years ago talking about the idea that you would one day be up here, and it's just a beautiful spot. So congratulations on this endeavor. I'm sure it wasn't short or easy, but it is a gorgeous facility.
It's
So.
almost done.
Yay, it really looks great. So thank you for having us. So I would like to take your pulse. We talked with Sue on the phone about some of this stuff, so we got kind of a preview, but I would love to hear from you all just about East Haddam in general. What do you think are the best things about town?
Our state parks.
State parks? Great.
Rural setting.
Rural setting, yes.
The village
Yes,
district.
keep going, keep going, keep going.
Village
The village district. Tell me a little bit about where that is and what that
The
means.
Opera House and
Yeah.
Gilston House. Bridge.
Yes. You're known for it. There's some of the things you're really
It's
known
the
for.
gateway to town.
Absolutely.
Our ability to blend very contemporary, sophisticated atmosphere, with very rural and traditional atmosphere. Almost unique in that.
That's a cool example, definitely. You're right that it is unique. EDCers, you must have some ideas about this.
Well, I think that one of the big draws is we have a lot of open space. We've developed a lot of trails. And I think that that is something that has brought about some tourism. Tourism is where we see our growth potential being. The Opera House and the Gillette's Castle are nice bases for us. And we're trying to start to fill in between those two with something that we can offer our tourism people who come, and I think that is something where I see some growth potential, but it's also our assets. And I look at it as the biggest thing we have to do is take better advantage of the assets that we have and basically expose them to a broader group of people.
We'll talk more about that, thank
Okay.
you. And also, we'll see in some of Sarah's industry slides quite a bit about that tourism piece, so,
Great.
yeah.
And in a more general sense, the proximity to the town has to the Connecticut River.
Yeah, right.
And when you talked about state owned land, how much of it is state owned land in town, do you know, percentage wise? I don't wanna put you on the spot, I'm just curious.
State, I would say, is-
Hop Yard, Sunrise,
I'd say somewhere in maybe 10%.
Yeah, wow, so that's a big.
It's a
chunk.
big piece. It's a
Yeah.
big piece of real
Yeah.
estate.
Maybe.
Well, we're talking just the state park, not
Well,
open space.
Open space in
Oh,
general.
open space in general.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
change
yeah.
Oh, now you're
Yeah.
getting into the 20s.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's great, so a
With all
quarter of
the
the town. for
conservancy
sure,
and,
for
yeah.
thanks for that.
Either passive recreation
Yeah.
or nature.
They're a big town though.
Yes,
compared
I'm
to
aware of
our-
that, thank you.
Yeah, geographical area, yeah.
Not a land area.
I drove most of it this afternoon.
Get lost.
I did.
No, GPS is a wonderful thing.
It's the saddest thing, we have all the geography and no gas.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what you think your challenges are. Over the next decade, what is East Haddam gonna be faced with?
Well, I think some of the challenge is that we do have a lot of open space. We do have a lot of land that is tied up in state parks. Agriculture is another one that we didn't talk about as far as an asset, which I think is a good one. And I think we're very open to the smaller farms and there's a lot of organic people coming in. So we have that property, but at the same time, it's all got to be paid for, and that's, I think, the struggle that any town would have in regards to, you have to do that. It's that balance. It's that tightrope that you walk to try and keep the, your taxes low and keep people things affordable. At the same time, respect the quality that we have in both, open space and agriculture and our tourism. All of that, we want people to come and see this beautiful place, but don't have too many settle here because then it would get too crowded, So, and then you have to keep services up for the people that we have. So, I think that's the biggest challenge is just making sure it all stays balanced. So we keep the beauty and afford to live here.
Yes, we're doing some work with one of the shore towns, and over the summer we were laughing because they said, we're built on tourism, but we hate tourists, right? I mean, it's the parking, it's the congestion on the roads, and we laugh, but it's so true. I mean, that balance is so tricky. Yes.
I think we have the same challenge that a lot of other communities have, which is adaptability. Our ability to be responsive to changing dynamics in both the demand and industry, in the skill set of our community, and our ability to adapt to new business as it is always evolving. And I think we are challenged with that, as I think many, many towns are.
Anything else that really just scratches your head? I mean, I'm sure you probably stay up at night sometimes, right? With some challenges. Lastly, before we kind of get into some more of the workshop, what could really be a game changer for you? I think one of the things I heard was the fact that the towns nearby are all working together on some tourism efforts. I mean, that could really be a game changer, right?
We feel it is. I mean, we're basically working with 5 towns. This is very new. This is something we've been working on for 4 to 5 months now. And it started off between the town of East Haddam and Haddam,
Sure.
and then we wanted to get Chester involved in it, and so very early on Chester came into it, and then we're just working down, and now there's Deep River and Essex. And that, working with the railroad, Essex Steam Train has been a wonderful partner with East Haddam. We meet with them on a regular basis, and they have been a wonderful business, and they have treated East Haddam with such, they want to help East Haddam succeed economically.
Well, it was such a natural because you hear of all the shoreline towns.
Right.
So to say the lower Connecticut River towns just was like a natural. I mean, it was like a no-brainer to, put
But
that
you're
together, because
still-
we all share that commonality of the river.
Yeah, but it's still a feat in this state, right?
Right.
Because we don't make it easy for towns to work together.
Well,
We pit each
typically
other against,
compete
right,
against each
right,
other.
especially when it comes to business and that kind of thing, so. Anything else kind of you feel like could be a game changer, either positive or negative?
Well, I think we have the opportunity down in the center of East Haddam with the existing, or the old town office building. That could be the beginning of the changer for East Haddam Village. I think what happens there is going to spread out around the rest of the village. If we do a good job there, it's going to be a very positive effect. If we do a lousy job, it's going to have a negative effect around the village. So I think that is probably the biggest game changer we have in the pot right now, because it affects the whole village.
Sure.
And I think that we have to do a good job, get the best possible developer in there who's going to be working on that project, and if that comes out well, it's going to encompass the rest of the village, and I think there's some interest there now, and I think there's opportunity, and I think it's going to be up to the town to see that it goes in the right direction. And
You're all part of that. I mean, influenced in great part by the EDC, by the PZC, by the town leadership. I mean, that's going to really be something that all of you are potentially involved in.
Can I ask a question before you turn it over to Sarah?
Please.
What's the role of the airport in town?
basically, the airport has a conservation easement on it right now, which was probably only a year old. And so it looks like the airport is going to be pretty much a conservation area, which I think with the first selectman negotiating with the owners have ended up being something where there is going to be some potential for walkways, to be able to do some uses, some public use of the property, but that's after the remainder interests of the owner he decides where it's going to go. But it seems like it's going to go to either a nonprofit or to a government agency. And if that happens, I certainly hope the town of East Haddam is in the bidding for that. And if it ends up going to the town of East Haddam, it's going to be a great opportunity for us to do some natural things and to give the public some access to that river. We don't have enough public access to the river. And I think that could be a huge influence on the village at some time if the owner decides that that's the route that he wants to go with it. So it's some things are happening there, and very recently, and I would say some positive things that now that we have the potential at some point of having some public access.
Thank you.
Yes.
After witnessing North Carolina, I would say that 500-year storm would be a game changer.
Right.
I thought we had that.
5
Did we
years
have
ago,
two
right?
of those?
We're done.
We're done.
Given, we've given.
It's over.
Another 495.
So let's dig into some data.
If you don't mind, I'm actually going to stand back here because with my charts, it's easier to point at the screen.
And also, just anyone that's interested, we do have water back there if anybody in the audience and stuff needs, help yourself.
So as Bob said, I'm going to present some data about East Haddam and some of your neighboring towns, comparison towns, or the state and the US, kind of just for a common body of knowledge. And also because a lot of the things I'm going to talk about will be touched on by Bob or Courtney later. So a lot of the terms you'll hear from me will be repeated later in the discussion. And so what we're going to talk about is we're going to do a little bit on demographics because the services that your town needs depend on the population characteristics. Older towns need different services than younger towns, for example. It also tells you what you can build on for maybe your tourism and recreation industry, for example. Then we'll talk about a little bit about employment and commuting. We'll talk about some industry patterns. We'll talk about where your residents work and where your workers live. We'll also look a little bit at how resilient you are to economic shocks. Then we'll look at fiscal health, primarily the grand list, and the debt here in town. because those are the resources your government has to rely on, but also the constraints on your ability to act sometimes. Finally, we'll talk about housing. Connecticut's a high-cost housing state, we all know this, but housing is increasingly more discussed more as part of economic development for a variety of reasons. I do want to encourage you to ask questions. And hopefully it's interesting. I really hope you're all interested in this, and I can talk about this for all night. So you probably don't want that, but feel free to speak up. And before I get into this really, usually what happens is people will be taking notes as I talk and trying to write down the numbers or whatever, and then a hand will go up about a third of the way through my presentation and say, can we just get a copy of the slides? And yes, that will happen. Courtney will send those over in the next day or maybe early next week, I'm not sure. So you will get a copy of all this. But I also want to remind you, if you aren't familiar with, the Connecticut Town Profiles that CERC puts out now in partnership with the Connecticut Data Collaborative. It's data on all 169 towns. A lot of data points I'm going to discuss here, but a lot more as well. You go to our website, you can pick by this little map, town name. One of the great aspects of it now is you can go back 3 years of profiles. Those are the PDF profiles. If you're looking for more data, if you want to compare yourselves to towns that I'm not comparing you to tonight, or if you want to look longitudinally over time, you can also go to the website of the Data Collaborative, and they have a lot of this data on there as well, ctdata.org. It's a really great resource in addition to our town profiles. So let's talk demographics. This is simply the total population in East Haddam and your neighboring towns in the 2000 census, 2010 census, and the most recent census estimates in 2016. So in East Haddam, you went from about 8,300 to 9,100 people over those 16 years. It's more than a 9% increase, although you can see a tiny little loss, probably about 2 people between 2010 and 2016. So that's not unusual in Connecticut, and you can actually see that occurred in several of your nearby towns as well. Colchester is your largest nearby town. It went from about 14,500 people to about 16,000 people. East Hampton, 13,000, over 13,000 to under 13,000 during that time. The other 3 towns also had increases, and they were all double-digit increases as well. So a lot of growth in this part of the state. The next slide is density. This is simply residents per square mile, so your population divided by the square miles. In the US overall, we're only 90 people per square mile because there's a lot of that empty land out west.
Yeah.
Connecticut, we are much more dense, 741 people. Here in East Haddam, you're actually much closer to the US, 168. You can really feel it as you're driving around. Very open area here. It's really nice. We're still looking at census data. This is population by age for the US, Connecticut, and East Haddam, and I want to draw your attention to this side. So you can see East Haddam has about the same share of population that's over 65 as in the Connecticut, and slightly larger than the US. We know we're an aging state. It's about 15%, 16%. But if you look at 45s and over, you can see you have a larger share than even Connecticut and then the US. That's half of your population is over 45 years old, compared to 44% and 41%. So you basically have an older workforce population. You can see one of the trade-offs there, smaller percentage of like very young workers, college students, recent college graduates. But, and this is population by educational attainment. I like my numbers, so we're on this side still. Those with a bachelor's or a graduate degree actually are about 38% of your population, adult population, folks over 25. That's the same as in Connecticut. We are a relatively well-educated state because 30% of the US population has at least a bachelor's. 2/3 of your town's population has at least some college or an associate's degree. And because of your ages and those educational levels, these are household incomes. These 2 groups right here are the share of households that earn over $100,000 per year It's about 35% of East Haddam or Connecticut's households. In the US, it's only a quarter of households earn over $100,000 per year. So now we're going to do the shift into employment.
Could you go back for a
Yep.
minute, Sarah? I just wanted to point out the size of the orange bar here,
Okay.
which is the 50 to 100,000. So you've got a lot of middle income folks and less on the poorer end of this. So it's, you know,
It's a
and
middle
that,
income
you'll
community.
see that too in the housing. A lot of times there's a correspondence between the income levels and the housing, value of housing in town.
Does that correlate though to the aging population and is it active income or?
It's any
investment?
household income, so it can be either one of those. I think it's the older workforce and it's the education. Those correlate pretty well with at least some college right there.
Thank you.
Now we'll go into jobs. I didn't write the number down. So this is simply 472 East Haddam residents work in East Haddam. 722 people work outside town somewhere, or live outside town but work in town. 3,900 people live in town and work somewhere else. So you can see kind of the job
see that on the
centers
bridge every
aspect
day.
there.
I see that on the bridge.
It's always good when people like are yes, that feels exactly right.
I have a question about that last
Yeah.
slide. If you've got 442 people that are working in town, and there's 722 people coming in here, where are the other 300 that we're missing?
It's 1,100 are working in town, so it's
Okay, so it's, all right,
470,
gotcha, so
yeah, add them together.
472 town residents.
Town residents working in town.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah.
All right, sorry.
No, sorry, I didn't know.
It just wasn't jiving.
Yeah, not a problem.
I
So
was doing math I didn't have to do.
yeah, you shouldn't do math at the end of the day.
Not a good idea.
So this is those residents, your residents, where are they working? And 11% of them, those 472 people, are working in East Haddam, followed by 7% work in Hartford, 7% in Middletown, so your two relatively big cities here. Then Chester, East Hartford, Colchester, Essex, Westbrook, Wallingford, Old Saybrook, and everybody else works somewhere else in Connecticut, Massachusetts. So. The reverse, where your workers live, 40% of them live here. So, because there's not a large, it's only 1,100 jobs. The next largest share, Colchester, then East Hampton, Haddam, Middletown, Chester, Hebron, East Lyme, Glastonbury, Deep River, and then everywhere else.
So on both of those slides, it really is us, on the 5 towns and,
exactly.
locals.
So this is the unemployment rate. The one, same one you're familiar with that comes out every month for the state and the nation. Also, we can get it for your town. And so the couple things to draw your attention to. One is most recently, Connecticut's unemployment rate was 4.5%. The US was 4.1%. East Haddam was 3.5%. So you are more resilient. You can see that here, especially in the aftermath of the Great Recession when you're several percentage points lower unemployment rate. One thing to note is you're getting a little more variable here and a little more extreme. Lower lows, higher highs. So, but otherwise, very resilient. So this is largest industries by employment, and these are the jobs in town. So again, those 1,100 jobs. So what we're looking at here is U.S., Connecticut, and East Haddam, and the share of jobs organized. What's largest in town? Arts, entertainment, and recreation is almost 25% of your jobs here in town. Probably not a surprise, right?
Nope.
Yeah. Just for reference, it's 2% of jobs in the state and the nation. So you have very strong concentration, and that largely due to the good speed and everything associated with that and other things. Second largest share is government, and you're actually just slightly below the U.S. overall, 16%, you're 14%, same as Connecticut. Your next largest industry is actually agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. It's 12% of jobs here are in that. Couple caveats, notes about ag. U.S. is 1%, Connecticut's actually less than 1%, that's why it's not showing up. Also, agriculture jobs can be a little difficult to count. They're seasonal, they are irregular. They also sometimes may not be exactly able to be counted based on how the people are paid. But these are estimates, so just know that it's your third largest industry. Fourth is educational services. That's about 7% of your jobs, 5%, 3%. Then you have accommodation and food services, concentration in construction there, other services, and administrative and support and waste management. These are top 8 largest industries. Again, these are the jobs in town, not the jobs your residents hold.
So when you think about opportunities, I mean, first of all, the first 4 categories represent 50% of total employment in your town. And, you know, there's the concept of supply chains. This isn't exactly the same, but you've got arts and entertainment, agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting, which really are synergistic. So it provides the opportunity, you know, agritourism is a big thing. You certainly should build on that as you think about tourism. And that's probably true in the other towns that you're working with. So you'll see much greater agriculture employment than you would see statewide, which isn't hard to do, as you can see based on this. And then accommodations and food service. So there's a real opportunity to think of them together and say, and you probably are already, but the numbers bear it out, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, this is a good, this slide really helps identify where some of your strengths might be and your what things you can build on for your industries. As Bob mentioned, maybe supply chains or just industries working together. So now we're into fiscal indicators, and this is just equalized net grand list for Connecticut and East Haddam in 2008 and 2015. And this is how your equalized net grand list is distributed amongst the categories, okay? So in Connecticut, about 70% of the equalized net grand list for all the towns comes from residential property. Didn't really change between that time period. Here in East Haddam, it went from about 85% to 82%. So you're still more reliant on the residential portion of your grand list than the townwide average. At the state overall, the gray is about 17%. That's commercial, industrial, public utility. Again, not really a big change between the years. Here in East Haddam, it went from 3% to 5%. Yellow is personal property. That was 11%. Here in East Haddam, that went from 8.5% to 11%. So slight changes. And one of the reasons why is this is your net grand list for those 2 years, broken down by the same categories with apartments also broken out, but these are the dollar values. So you can see there's a loss in value of your residential property during that time, equalized to net grand list. Apartments, basically the same, not much there. You can see your commercial, industrial, public utility, the value actually grew a little bit, but probably not enough against inflation. Personal property also grew slightly more than commercial, industrial, public utility. So that's just the total value of your grand list. Yet another way to look at your equalized net grand list, we try and look at stuff in many different ways, is per capita. So basically the assets of your town, how you distributed across the number of people there. So this is Connecticut, East Haddam, and then when Cirque was on the phone earlier this week, we said, what are 2 towns you might compare yourselves to? And we heard Chester and Haddam. So, and this is again, ENGL per year from 2012 to 2016. So here, you were just slightly under the state in 2012. It was about $144,000. But whereas Connecticut overall grew about 5%, here in East Haddam it declined about 7%, down to $134,000 per capita. Chester also declined. They went from $162,000 to about $143,000. Haddam had a very small increase, $152,000 to just over $154,000. So you can see you guys and your 2 neighboring comparison towns, not that far off from the state averages overall.
Can I just make a couple of comments?
Yeah.
I mean, this is your asset base on which you determine what services you can afford to provide your community, right? Because as you saw, you are so reliant on the property tax to pay for services. And there's sort of a direct correlation, which the first selectman knows, between the property value and the mill rate. It's an inverse relationship. Because if the property values go down and you want to continue to pay for the same services, and you're going to have some inflation, then there's nothing you can do but raise the mill rate. I'm sorry. The other thing you can do is add value to your grand list. And you added some value in the commercial and industrial component of your grand list over the last 2008 to 2016, I guess, are the numbers. But one fact to keep in mind, by the way, is that only 9 communities in Connecticut have recovered the full value of their grand list since the recession. So this is not an unusual phenomenon, and it's something that's facing the state as a whole. And when you consider the fact that in the last biennium, the state also decided it could no longer support towns at the same level as they used to, it's this. What's happening in your grand list is even more critical. So, and I'll come back to that a little bit in my section, but this is sort of, you were starting to say this a few minutes ago. I mean, this is why economic development is important, and what you want to do is do economic development in a way that maintains the character of your community, but still adds value in your grand list. I heard that too in your comments earlier.
Thanks, Bob. So that, as we said, that's your asset base. This is your debt, your bonded long-term debt per capita. For the same town, Connecticut, average of Connecticut towns does not include state, from 2012 to 2016. So during this time, your bonded long-term debt actually went down from about $2,000 per capita to about $1,700 per capita. Chester and Haddam also went down. Chester actually went down by like almost half, by a really good percentage. Whereas in this Connecticut average of towns went up from about 2,200 to 2,500 during this time. So you are still, especially now, well below what the Connecticut town average is.
I just point out, this is 2016. I don't know when you bonded for this facility.
It sure loves stuff that graph, I can tell you that.
About 3 days ago.
So, take that into account.
So it might go up a little bit when we come back in a couple of years. So just like you put your household income together with your household debts, you can do that for your town as well. This is a debt as your percent of grand list. So you can see the average of Connecticut towns has been pretty consistent at about 1.6%. Here in East Haddam, you were just below that, inched up a little bit in 2014, but back down, and I guess we're going to go back up again in the next year's data. Chester also went down, as did Haddam. But again, you guys below Connecticut town average, they are well below that. And this is where I add my note that debt doesn't have to be good or bad. You know, it kind of depends on what you're using debt for. So the thing to note is you could not be running debt, or you could use it for infrastructure investments for things like this. It's a decision of the town, but you guys would probably have a little bit of wiggle room. It's not like some of the other towns we go to where it's like way up there.
So just to add too here, that on your project on the old municipal property down by the bridge, you're going to do an RFP or something like that. And part of what you'll get in response is, what's the town going to do? What public services or what public infrastructure investment will the town make that will make my investment work? And maybe it's sidewalks, maybe it's, who knows what it is, but that's where you have some latitude here. I would just say that none of these numbers are out of whack. It's always selling it to the residents that this is a prudent investment of your dollars, because it's in turn going to bring investment to the community or whatever it happens to be. So, but when people respond to that RFP, they're going to want to know, what can I expect from the town?
So now we're in my final set of slides on housing. We're back to Census Bureau data. And I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to apologize here in advance.
You want some water?
No, I'm okay. Just keep the shouting. Normally I don't have a problem talking for a really long time. So this is owner-occupied and renter-occupied housing. So in both the US and Connecticut, it's about a third of occupied housing is renter-occupied. Here in East Haddam, it's 16% of your housing is renter-occupied. So of the owner-occupied housing, this is the value of it. And this is, Bob referred to this slide a little earlier. So if we look at, I'm going to take this part right here on, because this is $300,000 or higher, the housing value that high. That is 40% of housing here. Pretty much just slightly under the percent in Connecticut, but you can see it's well over the share of housing in the US overall. This is what the share Bob referred to. This is the $200,000 to $300,000 range. That is a very much larger share here in East Haddam than it is in Connecticut or the US. In fact, it's about 40% of your housing is in that range. Consequence, you have a much smaller share of housing that's under $100,000 and even under $200,000 than even Connecticut, but especially the US.
And I don't know whether this is true everywhere, but the other large bar was the 50 to 100,000 in income. And does that correspond to an ability to afford a house that's 200,000 to 300,000?
I don't know, but
Interesting question.
but we will see a reflection of that the other way in 2 slides. So real fast, sometimes we just like to look at this one when it's unusual. So of your vacant housing here in town, 68% of it is for seasonal, recreational, or occasional use. And I'm assuming some of it, I heard you have some housing for like people coming, performing at the Goodspeed and stuff. Mm-hmm. That's probably a share of it, or maybe people have homes up near the river or the waterfront. But we just like to kind of note that when it's a large share. Now, it's not a huge number of homes, but it is a large share of the vacant ones. And this is my final slide. This is housing affordability. We hear this a lot, especially at the national level in parts of Connecticut. This is just how much households are spending of their income on housing. The guideline is you don't really want to be spending more than 30 or 35% of your income on housing. So for Connecticut, in East Haddam, owners who have a mortgage and renters, we'll look at the top here, 26% of owners in Connecticut are paying more than 30%, that's where I said it, 35% of their income on housing. In East Haddam, it's 27%, so in line. Renters in Connecticut, 43%, pay more than 35% of their income on housing. Here in East Haddam, it's 26%. So a smaller share of your renters compared to Connecticut are considered housing burdened, paying more than a third of their income on housing. The bottom side here, this is households paying under 20% of their income on housing, 37% statewide, 39% here, so just slightly more. 23% of renters in the state, and 41% of your renters are paying less than 20% of their income on housing. And again, this is largely due to those incomes we saw slides ago, because you do have a very large share in the band in the middle there. On that side, I think that's my, yes?
I have one question related to that, which is the data for the owners with a mortgage is only those households that have a mortgage on their home. Do you have, I'm sure the data is available on what proportion of properties actually have a mortgage in town versus are without much?
Yes, it's Census Bureau data, and I can get that for you if you'd like. It does exist, though. And we chose mortgages because they have more costs associated with the homes, so.
It just strikes me that if you have a significant proportion of your homes without a mortgage, then that also speaks to the ability to pay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They did pay.
They've already paid. I got it.
They were the lucky ones who finished paying before everything went crazy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, why do you care about economic development? You're going to hear me say this a lot. I've already said it a couple of times, but one of the things to think about economic development is that it's a very conscious activity, and it's designed to change something in the economic direction and outcomes in a community. Okay? And it's different, therefore, from growth, which I'll talk about in just a second. This actually bullet is incorrect, but maybe I'll correct it by the next time we do this. Actually, the average residential component of the grand list across the state is 70%. The actual reliance on property tax, the total grand list, is much higher than that in most communities, closer to 90%. So you know why I'm saying that, because that is your asset base, and we'll come back to that. So what I started saying a few minutes ago is the fiscal health of your community right now is being determined in large part by the state. The increased pressures that are on the state, the fact that the state does not really solve the fiscal crisis. The next governor is going to have a $4.2 billion deficit for the biennium that he is going to have to deal with. And you know, you exacerbate that by the fact that most towns, most cities have not recovered the full value of the residential component of the grand list. And then another thing you need to look at is what's your debt and how much are you paying for your debt. And all of those things have to be balanced with the character of your community. So the bullets on the top are the things that Ed wrings his hands about all the time and loses sleep over. And then the bottom one is, you know, maybe there are some things we can do to solve that problem, but what can we maintain the character of our community? That's usually the argument that goes on. So what's the difference between growth and development? Growth is an increase in the value of everything produced, okay, in the gross national product or local product. And that's something that happens kind of automatically, and economists would say that. Development is an increase in wealth in an area for the benefit of the people who live there. And it's usually the outcome of conscious planning and results-oriented activity. Growth is an essential part of economic development, which is conscious. But you know, if you think about recessions in the way economists talk about recessions, in a business cycle, they're always talking about cyclical factors and they're talking about structural factors. And those cyclical factors are the ones that are really growth. And the growth goes down, the growth in incomes goes down, and you know, sometimes it comes back, and that's the business cycle. Then there are structural elements. And structural elements are when something happens that is a shock to the system, and everybody always talks about buggy whips. The guys who made buggy whips went out of business when the automobile came around. That was a structural change in the economy. The one that's more recent is you don't see a lot of people in Connecticut who are issuing mortgage-backed securities any longer. I mean, that was what caused the last recession. And nobody wants to be in mortgage-backed securities anymore. They've got some new stuff that they're selling, but that was a structural change. And the reason that's important in thinking about the importance of economic development is because in the 1970s, it was kind of, most recessions were about 50-50. They were 50% structural and 50% cyclical. And now the structural elements are closer to 80%. So 80% of your jobs and your investment are not going to come back automatically because of the cycle. And therefore you have to think consciously about what you do to change that. Now, most audiences I know, I'm in East Haddam, you're saying to yourselves, well, that's the Federal Reserve Bank's problem. What can I do about that? Well, the Federal Reserve Bank actually, I haven't said this before, but I'm just thinking about it, they handle mostly the cyclical issues. You know, they're doing monetary policy to try and bring things back into balance. But the structural issues are, okay, so if there were structural changes that had to do with mortgage-backed securities or financial instruments, how many people in our town are employed in those industries? Or how many businesses in town are dependent on those industries? And what can we do to make sure that whatever shocks occurred for people in town or businesses in town, is there anything we can do about it? And if you think about it, if there are structural changes in the economy and a lot of people lose their jobs and it's going to be more difficult for them to lose their jobs, what happens to spending on tourism? Just as an example, it'll go down. It'll go down. So it's just a way of saying, don't think that these things are outside your ability to impact. They are things that you need to think about consciously when you decide what you want to do for economic development in your community. So let's talk a little bit about, your community and how you play in the economic development field. So what is your reputation in the economic development marketplace? Do you know that you are a product in a marketplace? And who are the buyers? I will tell you that in the absence of a clear brand, who is determining what type of investment comes into your town? Land use attorneys? Engineering firms? People who are market makers, who have clients. Their clients call them up and say, this is what I want to do. I want to open a new restaurant. You know, this is the kind of demographic I'm looking for. What town should I put it in? And unless you're out there and they know who you are, what your demographics are, you know, they're not going to say, go to East Haddam. They're going to say something else. So this is really an important first step, is knowing what your product is and making sure you're out there telling the people that are market makers, you know, what that product is. In the absence of a clear brand, all of these other people are determining what's going to happen to your community. So I'm just going to read this to you. This is from a business owner in the Pioneer Valley of Massachusetts. It's just a really great way of hearing what a business person wants from you. I'll look this way and not give you my back. We want to locate where we are wanted, where government appreciates our contribution to the economy and values local ownership, where people understand that it's a good thing for the community if we make money. That's kind of a fundamental definition of economic development. You know, that money comes into the community. In the next sentence, we want to work with officials who are focused on growing the economic pie and who value our business activity because we export goods and services out of the valley, yet the profits stay in the valley. That's what happens when you have a business in town that exports products outside of town or outside of the region. You're getting the capital back in, and that capital is being spread through your community. So that's why it's important. We want local government to create a favorable playing field for all business activity and be active in keeping track of the customer satisfaction level, which Courtney will talk about in a few minutes. We want to be in a town where government is strategically focused on providing a business-friendly place. Is that a lot to ask? I mean, if you think so, I mean, maybe you do. But you know, if you think so, you need to know that this is at least what business people are saying they want. And the question is, can you deliver that? Or can you say, you know, this is our community, and yes, we really love what you do for our community, but this is what we're asking for from you as well. But you can do, but you need to be aware that this is an expectation. Most people don't think it's an undue expectation, but sometimes, you know, you'll have the Inland Waters Commission in the back row, and they might think that it's a little much. Here's the range of people who live in town, right? Some people are, you know, we just haven't grown enough as a community. Whatever growth we can get here is great. Some say, wait a minute, well, not maybe everything, but in the right place. Let's make sure we're cognizant of where we're putting something and it's consistent with our values and our idea of what looks good. Healthy skepticism, you know, this is a great community. We don't need any more new investment. And then finally, don't change the character of our community, or we don't want anything in our backyard. So you've got a full range of things, and part of doing economic development as well is engaging in the entire spectrum of this. Because you can no longer do a project and push it through planning and zoning without anybody knowing about it. I mean, people show up for meetings now. They want to have a say in what you're going to do, particularly in a wonderful community like this, where you have assets that the community really loves and, you know, do not want to see anything happen to. So there'll be lots of interest in this RFP, right?
Oh, yeah.
And there probably already is.
Yep.
But it's a matter of engaging in a different way, and you'll hear me talk about that in a minute. So I never say this, but if you look at the first slide, the title of this presentation is Moving from Transactional to Transformational Approaches to Economic Development. And that's my point. You know, you can't do a transaction on a piece of real estate any longer without having a discussion about whether it's consistent with the plan of conservation and development, or with other plans that have been adopted by the community. And even if there aren't other plans, there's this aura of what the community wants to see. And you have to take that into account. So a lot of times what happens is people who are doing a transaction, who you guys know come before you time and time again, they have a different, the different things are driving them. They've made an investment in a piece of real estate. They've made an investment in planning. They've made an investment in legal assistance. And they want a process that they can get through in a quick amount of time. The community's saying, hold on, we want to talk. We want to have a discussion with you about what this is. So there's a natural tension a lot of times in this. And understanding that the process is has to be much more inclusive than it ever has before. Real estate development, is pretty transactional. Economic development, not quite as much. It's actions of policymakers that promote the standard of living and economic health of an area. And then community development, traditionally, is a process where community members come together, take collective action, and generate solutions to common problems. I would say economic development is much more like community development now because of what I've been saying. It has to be much more inclusive. Any question? I'm just continuing to go on here. If you have any questions, let me know. So this is just an outline of it. You have transactional people and transactional things that they want to have happen, and then you have transformational. And it's just, you need to be conscious of the differences and try and bridge the gaps in order to get projects done. So, I talked about a little bit, is the Federal Reserve responsible for recessions, or are you responsible for recessions? Same thing here. What do you control locally? And really in town you control the mill rate and you control the land use regulations. When it comes to, are you an attractive community, and will somebody want to invest here? Property taxes. The other thing you can do, and I would say, by the way, if there are two critical components of economic development in today's economy, they are creating great places and providing training to make sure our workforce meets the needs of our employers. And I have a slide coming up, but you are within a region that is going to see a lot of growth in manufacturing jobs because of electric boat. So what does that mean to your community? How many of them are going to live here or do live here? And is the housing stock the type of housing that's going to be in demand for workers at electric boat? That's a question you can ask, and then you can say, well, if it's not and we want to do some housing, where is it going to be? What is it going to look like? And that's creating great places. It's got to be a communal activity. I was on a panel with a developer who did a project in Darien, and is still doing the project. It's been his life for the last 15 years, actually. And when he first decided to do it, it's a transit-oriented development project at the Darien train station. But if you don't know Darien at all, I mean, that is right downtown. It's a congested area of town, and it was difficult to do a master plan for this. And what he did is he put up a website well before he ever went to the town, any board of commission in town. And it was an educational website about transit-oriented development, talked about density of development, things like that. And he said, yes, all the crazies decided to comment on stuff that I posted, but it gave me the opportunity to comment back. And over a year or so, that sort of worked its way through the system. So by the time I went before the land use boards, people loved the project. And so it's nice to have developers, by the way, that get that and are willing to put that into what they're going to do. But it also, and you talk about the RFP, that's going to be a collective activity that you will do with the selected developer. It will be it will have to be a project where there's constant communication, and there should be communication with the broader community as well. And you can control relationships with local businesses, which Courtney will talk about. So this is just, and as we said, you'll get the slides, but this is from Project for Public Spaces. That's one of the leading placemaking organizations in the country. And this is the type of inclusive process that makes things work these days. And without going all through them, I will say the two most critical ones is that the community is the expert.
So you have to start with the community and answer their questions and have them ask questions, and then you're never finished. So once you do one project, you gotta start the process over again with another one. So I asked, what do you control? Well, let's now talk about what's your role in the broader world. And I just talked about electric boat. We have major manufacturers. We have an economy in Connecticut that while the total amount of manufacturing has been going down, the products we tend to manufacture are very high value products, and they're exported to a large degree. And I always ask this question, and maybe I should have checked. If we've been doing this for 4 years, I hope the answer is still the same. Do you know who buys more product from Connecticut than any place else? What country? Somebody can guess.
Canada.
It almost always has been Canada, and it's not right now.
Is it like Norway or Sweden?
No.
No.
But you're getting closer. It's a European country. It's France, actually.
Huh.
And you know why it's France? Because they buy a lot of Pratt & Whitney engines. They have an airline consortium. And actually, transportation equipment is our biggest export. But the point of that is, so, you know, you've got Sikorsky, you've got UTC, in that industry, you've got Electric Boat, and even though they're doing almost everything they do for the federal government, these are products that are highly sophisticated. And for the first time in decades, we're going to see growth in employment in those areas. So what's the impact? It's something to be thinking about. So, you know, what's your role in the regional economy? We were talking a little bit ahead of time about Colchester and what's your relationship with Colchester? Because I'm probably going to drive that way in order to go to Charlestown tonight. And so you know that you don't have a lot of services in town, and that you leave town to go to either East Hampton, yeah, or to Colchester. So that's the role you play. Now, we've been in communities about your size, and they say, well, maybe we can get a Trader Joe's. Did you hear that? I didn't. But people will, that's one thing people might say, or can we get some sort of a food store in town? But knowing your role, you look at that commutation slide, you send people out of town to work every day. You know, 3 times as many, 4 times as many leave town as come into town. So, and you know what was interesting? If you think back to that pie chart that Sarah showed, where 58% of it were other than the 10 top towns, that's a very high number. And interestingly, you don't have direct highway access, so you would think that number would be lower because it's not as easy. But people are going quite a distance to work from here because they love living in this town, right? So, you know, also interesting that you see this great thing, which nobody knows what it is polycentric nodal region. Well, I'll tell you, this is kind of a polycentric nodal region in the fact that I won't even count Colchester in this, but let's say New London, Norwich, Middletown. I mean, you know, each one of those you are part of the sphere of influence of each one of those cities, I would say. And that means that it's not like living in Farmington, where you know that your city is Hartford. And the commutation data shows that too, because you send people a lot of different directions at work. So you can't just latch your star onto what's happening in Norwich and know that that's enough. You really need to look more broadly. And the thing I say here too is, by the way, take advantage of the assets of all the communities around you in selling yourself. You know, I used to have these discussions with this guy who's running for governor right now, Oz Griebel, when Oz ran the Metro Hartford Alliance, and I was running a similar organization in New Haven. And I'm a regionalist. I think towns should work together on all sorts of things. But Oz came up to me at a meeting one day, and he said, Bob, you know, we should really talk about marketing jointly. And I sort of thought for a minute, and I said, you know, Oz, if what you mean by marketing jointly is that you want to take credit for the fact that Yale is in the Hartford region, I'm not going to let you do it. So, you know, regionalism goes so far. Yeah. But that's what you should do. We have tremendous institutions in the state that are assets of your community. And even though you're a big community, your assets are much greater than the 50 or 51 square miles that make up this town. So when you think about marketing the town, you really need to market your region. Yeah.
I have a question for them. What town do you align yourselves most with as far as like where there's services? Like Bob was saying, Colchester, East Hampton, Middletown, Old Lyme. What is your,
I can tell
Where
you
do you
that
align?
when people who come in, talk to my office, it really depends on where they live in the stretch of town, so where they're
And
coming
where they
home
commute.
from work.
Then where they can
So it's a real, there is no.
It's a mishmash.
It's a
It
mixed
really
bag.
It is all over the page.
Mm.
If they work down near London, they make their way back through there. It's the same thing from Saybrook, it's the same thing from Hartford. It's what the most convenient thing is to it, because we do that quiz all the time, and it's, and it was really bad when we didn't have Bristol Market, because we had 0. So everybody at that point was forced to go elsewhere. And, one of the examples, I had a kid that she wanted to buy a house, and I said, go to Dobie Hill, and all of us know it's out in the far southwest corner, it's out in nowhere land. I had to tell her, what are you gonna do for stuff? Well, I'll get a deal. Good luck with that.
When I first moved to town, we didn't have the gristmill, and we didn't have East Hampton, I think. So from my house in East Haddam, where I live, I could go to Saybrook, Norwich, or I guess Middletown for the grocery store, the big grocery store. So literally, within 20 minutes, I guess Colchester was there, so Colchester. But I mean, literally, it's, 20 minutes to anywhere, so it wasn't, and then like you said, once you start working, depends on which way you're going.
where you're going. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
It's interesting that way, because there aren't a lot of communities, I don't think, that are situated like this, where you go multiple ways. And I did say, I said this a little earlier, that I did drive around town a lot earlier. And, I went 11 miles, I guess, from Devil's Hop Yard to here. And usually I'd go through 4 towns, because it's like 3 miles, 3 miles, 3 miles. So it makes a difference how big.
One of the most unique things is we have one gas station.
Really?
And that one gas station, as agriculture as we are, doesn't sell diesel fuel. So, when you're on empty, you have to drive a ways to go get that. So you have to consider that before you.
Just go downhill.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you can do that in town a lot too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you gotta go up a hill immediately at the end of the downhill.
So I started talking about regions, and regions really are, you need to be cognizant of what's happening worldwide in order to know its impact on your town. You can't impact it. And similarly, you really can't, I asked this question once of a consultant that was working in Connecticut. This was 25 years ago, and he was talking about Connecticut's role in the global economy. And he said, well, there are globally competitive regions. And I asked him, what's the size? What's the smallest size of a globally competitive region? He said, probably a 5 million population. Well, we're 3.7 million. And by the way, we're not one market in Connecticut. We're part of the Boston market, we're part of Providence market, we're part of a Worcester market, we're part of a New York market. And a Hartford market and a New Haven market. But what we always say about Connecticut's location, we're located halfway between New York and Boston. How about we're located in a region that has New York and Boston as its assets? It's similar to what I was saying about use those assets to sell your community. So that's one thing to think about. Changing role of urban centers, suburbs, and rural areas in the decade between 2000 and 2010, Stamford, Norwalk, and New Haven all gained population. And it's not lost on me that they are connected to the New York metro area. But that's the first time since the 1920s that 3 of our cities actually gained population rather than lost population. So there is definitely a move to urban centers. Now, if you were in the Midwest and said an urban center, you test me on this, a woman that's from Omaha. If you're from the Midwest, there is a urban center, and then there's nothing. Because of when we developed in the 18th century and the 19th century, there are town centers every 7 miles, because that's how far you were willing to ride a horse to church on a Sunday morning. And there's a congregational church almost every 7 miles on a green somewhere. But you know what? Those are town centers. Even going through what did I say?
Millington.
Millington, that's clearly was a center.
Oh, yes.
You know, so the reason I say that is because sometimes people think when you talk about urban, you're talking about New Haven or Hartford. And really what we have is really cool, small, compact town centers that people want to be in. And they're recreating them all over the country. They look like Disney sets, but they're recreating them all around the country. We have the real thing here. So that's another thing, you know, you have an opportunity to infill some stuff, but doing it in a way that's consistent with the 18th century character, 19th century character of your community. So this goes to also, I'm sorry to keep going back to the RFP, but this is a big opportunity you have and you want to be able to do it right. And some people will say, well, you know, these developers come in and they do whatever they want and we can't control it. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples of development.
That's Cromwell, right?
Good for you. That is Route 372 in Cromwell. I always say that the owner probably took out his money by selling gravel. And that's why this video is 4 years old. Nothing has changed here. There are two developments, a Liberty Bank and a CVS pharmacy, and then there's an empty pad that hasn't been sold.
They're actually going to be developing that.
Oh, is that right? Well, good for you. Well, so my point here is this is one way you can develop. And I shouldn't say it's a horrible development, but did they really need to take that down? And I will tell you also that we did this presentation once for the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. There were about 70 people in the room. And this guy in the back raises his hand, and I look at him and I say, oh, there's the planner. And he stood up and he said, well, first, Bob, let me tell you that I wasn't in Cromwell when this happened. His other point was, you know, we hear about crumbling foundations in this area. There's a little north of here, but you've heard these stories. Well, these foundations in those apartments are falling apart too, but not because of some element that was in the cement.
Right.
So anyway, you know, okay, if that's what Cromwell wanted to do, that's what Cromwell wanted to do.
Glastonbury.
Glastonbury. Sure is.
You know, we should have prizes. These guys over here. So that is Glastonbury. And Glastonbury has a strong architectural review board. And they have another pharmacy right down the street that looks very similar to this. But all I'm trying to say is, you guys know, you have some authority to sit down with these folks and say, we want something that's consistent with the character of our community. And, you know, we have some power in a negotiation here to make sure we get it.
And that's not an overwhelming thing to ask, because every one of these corporations, if those are done, have 25 to 30 models.
Right.
And you just immediately say, bring out your portfolio and bring it out. And it doesn't really cost them all that much more to do it. They have it. They just, at certain times they get a little lazy and they say, we want to go with the standard and keep on running, because our contractors know how to build it. So
Well, maybe that's what Dollar General's gonna look like right there.
They could put a little green sign, just like, just
Little
like that
green
McDonald's
sign,
and,
couple of gables, it'll be nice.
Maine, I go by, it's, the sign's this big, it's a White House, it's beautiful.
This is the New England model.
Whatever works.
And this is now a very important corporate member of our corporate community, the idea that they've now bought Aetna. And, if you will remember, Aetna said they were leaving Connecticut, and they reversed that decision because CVS wants them where the talent is, and the talent is in Hartford. The actuarial talent that they're going to need. So, okay, one more example. Oh, there it is. This is one more example.
Built the Main Street.
Okay, are you gonna guess this one too?
No, I don't know that one.
This is Simsbury.
Oh.
And if you know Simsbury at all, this is
That
Hot Meadow
Meadow?
Street.
Okay.
And there is a parallel street behind it called Iron Horse Boulevard. And in between, we actually were up there last week doing this. We weren't doing, yes, we were doing
Oh,
this.
I forgot to ask you, what did they say about this slide?
Well, they liked the slide, they sort of went like this because none of it's been done. But Simsbury went through a very tough time. They had what was called a smart growth development that was offered by a developer. And as it went through the process, this big rectangle appeared in the middle of it. I think it wasn't Dollar General, but it was Walmart or something like that. And it tore the community apart. And Mary Glassman, who had been the first selectman and then came back again and worked for the lieutenant governor for a while, and as you know, was one of the candidates for 5th District Congress this year. She came back and she said, well, I'm going to bring the community together by having an inclusive planning process where we're going to talk about this area between Hot Meadow Street and Iron Horse Boulevard because it's underutilized. There's a small hardware store, there's a little coffee shop, there's a lot of surface parking, there's changes in elevations between parking lots. It's just not very good. So they started looking at something like this. And as you saw, there was a transformation in some of these buildings as we went along. It wasn't just that they appeared. But, you know, we also had the planner from Simsbury when we did this once. And I said to him, well, look at this building right here. This building, is that consistent with your current height restrictions in your code? And he said, no, it's probably at least a half a story higher. And I said, well, does this look out of place for Simsbury? And he said, no, it really doesn't. This is a density slide. This is to show people that you can do infill development in a really cool way that's consistent with what you want your community to look like. And, you know, being able to show people something like that, if you have a developer that can't show you this, it's not the right person. It's not the right firm. So the other thing to keep in mind, and this will be helpful to people as well, is the value of downtown development or infill development versus big box development. And these are two projects in Enfield where Courtney used to work. And just I'd look at the third line down more than anything else, which is total property taxes per acre. And, you know, for Costco, it's $19,000. For the downtown Cornerstone project, it's almost $400,000 if you put them both on an acre basis, right? And that's because there's 1, 2, 3 stories for one thing, you know, so you're getting 3 times the square footage for the height of the building. And what this says is, you know, do it where we've already developed. Just do some infill that's consistent with the rest of the community. And that will work for this community, you know, particularly in a community like this. Okay? Any questions?
Sure.
Courtney's going to come up and tell you how to do it.
No pressure or anything. You guys are already doing a great job. So let's just talk about nuts and bolts a little bit. So who's on your economic development team? All of you in the audience, for one thing, right? There's probably several others that are on the team that are not here tonight. But you see yourself in these bullet points. Your board and commission members, your elected officials, your key staff members in town. And who else is probably on the team who you're working with on a daily basis? The business association. You all are a big component of that team. And EDC, I would encourage you specifically to be leaning on that group to help engage that business community, those members and probably prospective members of that association. You're probably putting events on, and you want to be glomming onto those events and taking some partnership together to say, we're doing this together. We're reaching out, and we're working directly with the business association to really get to know our businesses. Also, certainly commercial real estate industry professionals. You all on PZC are seeing the same brokers, the same developers probably time and time again. So who are those folks, and do they know what East Haddam is all about? Do they know where you all want to potential development that could come down in the village area? You know, make sure they know what the vision is so that they're thinking about your town top of mind. They are part of your economic development team. The government delegations. So your legislative, state and federal legislative delegations, are they advocating on behalf of your business community regularly? Are you sharing with them regularly what the concerns are that you're hearing in town so that they can go to the Capitol respectively and really make sure that they're putting policies in place that will help your businesses? Schools and universities, those are a big part of your workforce plan. So we talked a lot about matching the skills that they're educating on today in your school system with what are the future needs of your workforce. Make sure you know what those are by bringing your manufacturers and your other industries together to say, what are your needs for the future, and how can we then work with the schools to make sure that they're training and educating to those needs. So all of these are members of your economic development team. And economic development commissioner specifically for this slide, but then I'll broaden it back out to that whole team. You're probably doing some of these things. Some of them on the top are fairly obvious. You're adopting strategy. You're contributing to the POCD in town to make sure that that priority of economic development is listed in your document. You're identifying those areas of town. Some of those are kind of obvious. But are you also really working with your PZC and your other land use commissions to really, again, help advocate for your business community? You're hearing on the ground that they're frustrated, for example, with signage regulations. Are you then taking the regulation and redlining it based on the feedback that you're receiving from your businesses and then giving it to PZC because they have a lot on their plate dealing with applications week in and week out. And we have taken it upon ourselves to, put some edits onto the signage regulation to maybe come up with a compromise. We have the regulation in place because we want a certain look and feel for our community. That's completely valid. But at the same time, the businesses are saying it's too stringent. This is just an example of something that the EDC could help liaise with the land use boards and commissions. So I encourage you to think about that. Think about changing a zone. And again, you might go back to your legislative delegation. Something I did when I was the economic developer in Farmington was I recognized that bioscience was coming. We had UConn Medical School there. We had Jackson Labs coming in. I wanted that whole geographic area to represent an opportunity for other businesses to take advantage of some tax breaks if they were going to also be doing bioscience. So I went to the legislative delegation with our EDC and said, would you consider putting a bioscience enterprise zone together? And over the course of a couple of years, we were able to do that. So be thinking out of the box on some of the things that you could be doing to make sure that your businesses feel supported and you're responding to all of the data that Sarah showed us tonight. These are our strong industries. These are our growing industries. Put together, we want to be sure that we're advocating for them and with them in a meaningful way. And then of course, EDC, you can be doing things like advocating on behalf of a proposal. If you think it's a great proposal from an economic development standpoint, are you chair then writing a letter to PZC chair to say we approve of this we approve of this proposal? Obviously, you need to be looking at the zoning regulation in your meeting, and that's basically what you're going to be making your decision on. But by the way, this makes good economic sense for our community. Or conversely, this really doesn't, and here's why. And then that way, the PZC has that additional knowledge when they're making their decisions on a proposal. So we've heard some definitions of economic development. I'll share mine, and it goes in this order. Business retention is the most important. We want to be sure that our businesses here in town are going to stay in town, that they're thriving, that you know that they're there, that they feel appreciated. Remember back to that quote, they just want to feel appreciated and make sure that there's a level playing field in town by the community leaders. So we want to make sure we're visiting with them. We want to make sure we're getting to know them, whether maybe it's that round table like I was talking about with the workforce piece. Make sure you're bringing them together. You're having events with the business association, for example, or even beyond that, just townwide with all the businesses. Make sure that they are also aware of what the vision is, what the new development that's coming in. Make sure that they really feel like they're in the know and they know who to come and talk to. So that's the retention piece. Expansion, while I know you, while I'm visiting with you, I'm going to ask you whether you are going to be able to expand, let's say in the next couple years. And if you are, then let me help support you do that. Are you gonna be able to expand on the parcel that you're already on the footprint that you have? Okay, great. Let's talk about getting through the land use regulatory process and making it easy for you. We'll hold your hand and we'll walk you through the permitting and all that kind of thing if you're ready to expand right where you are. If you're not and you're just gonna grow so much and bring so many new jobs in and you need to find another available property in town, let us also help you do that. So getting your ear to the ground in that retention piece allows you to help accommodate them and help them with future expansion. And conversely, it also helps you understand if they're struggling and they need some help and assistance because they would be threatening to downsize or even leave town. But you're not gonna know that unless you know them, you're asking those questions. So you wanna be visiting your businesses, you wanna be sure you know them, having that relationship so that you can help them and hopefully expand that commercial tax base in turn. Recruitment is a little hard for towns like this. I always recommend that that's not a great use of limited resources because it's just so difficult for, let's say, one economic developer to go out farther afield than the state, either nationally or internationally, to potentially get one business into town. If you have those pre-existing relationships, then that might make more sense. But generally, business attraction is better done with limited resources at the regional level. So CIRC is one example of a group that's doing, as you heard Bob say, globally, we're doing business recruitment, we're also doing it domestically. So nationwide, we're getting companies interested in Connecticut, and then they might be interested once they're here in a certain region, at which point, if you're working with us, or whether it's a COG or a regional economic development organization, then you can say, okay, we have interest in that company, or we have an interest in that industry, and we have the following available parcels that might accommodate. And then that's where we can make a match when a company has really narrowed down to the area that they want to be in, and they've told us what their specifications are. We need this certain amount of square footage, or this certain amount of acreage, we need these ceiling heights. We're asking you what parcels match with those specs, and then we're making that match and having them come and tour your community and those parcels, and potentially landing here. So it's just a simple, shots on goal formula that it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for one or two people to be doing global business attraction for a small community, and you can work with organizations that are already doing that in a more affordable way. And then business creation is really about supporting our entrepreneurs and our home-based businesses. I haven't asked or heard tonight about home-based businesses, but I'll ask EDC or the Business Association, are you aware that you have a lot in town and probably growing?
We have quite a few in town that I think we probably haven't figured out as a community how to recognize.
Yes. Yeah, and that's what a lot of our communities are telling us, and they're realizing, oh my gosh, there's more and more every year too. So that's really cool, and there's a lot of really cool things that are happening to support our entrepreneurs. You're seeing co-working space start up. You're seeing entrepreneurs and residence type programs where they're tapping retired, skilled executives in whether it be accounting or law or IT to help those entrepreneurs start and grow their business. So there's things that you can be doing to support them. What I would encourage when it comes to, we don't even know how to wrap our arms around the number or who they are yet, is just simply hold an event and just have them start coming out of their homes and just be able to at least start a contact list, and then that will grow because they'll know other folks, and you just kind of, it'll, like a tumbleweed, right? It'll just grow over time. But it is difficult, but if you just have a very inclusive event, for example, that will help at least start that conversation. And we've said it all night, right? But we're doing all of this while maintaining the character of East Haddam. It's so critical. We don't want to be something we're not. We hear a lot of towns say, well, West Hartford is like this and this and this. And I always say, but you're not West Hartford. You don't want to be West Hartford. They have some cool characteristics, but you all have that authentic characteristic. I mean, Bob was talking about it. It's so true. So just take advantage of what you have and what your character is, and make sure that you're doing all of these things in that context. This is simply that site finder, CIRC site finder piece that, I don't know if you're members or not, Emmett, do you know? It really goes back to that business attraction piece. So as site finder members, you're getting the information first about companies that are interested and what their specs are, but we can talk about that. It's really just a shameless
And
plug.
we might be able to help you distribute the RFP to commercial brokers and others who are members of ours.
Okay.
That's a good point. We can talk about that. So back to the entire team, which you all remember that you're members of. These are the components of a really successful program. We talked about the retention, that visitation, that's so important. Are you all doing visitation on a regular basis with your businesses?
Yeah, I do. I mean, basically,
Yeah, so
I
do I.
work in town, I live
Yeah.
in town, so, almost just go to the gas station, go to the grocery store, go to the lumber yard. We're constantly coming, and that's something kind of to do with a small town. But it's different when you actually live here and work here.
Yeah.
And so you do come in contact with the owners, and you do hear what their situations are, and they are free at giving us
Yeah,
their
sure.
opinion about it.
They're candid, and it's good. I mean, that's because they have a trusted relationship with you. So they do feel candid, and I encourage that, so that's great. I would suggest, because I'm working with another town that is big on tourism as well, that you might consider doing a specific event around the tourism industry. Bring those folks together, both in entertainment. Are you
I'm laughing because we have one going on October 6th.
Oh, you're doing it
You are
already?
doing it,
Oh,
yeah. So that's why I'm laughing, is
Yeah, no, that's
we're
great.
working with our business association and stuff, so.
But you're bringing all those industry pieces that Sarah showed us, the arts and entertainment, the retail, the restaurant, all the food service, all that.
We have
Lodging.
32 businesses are participating in our
Very
fall
cool.
weekend, and so it is.
Wonderful.
It's growing. This is our third year.
12
And
major
we
events.
started off with 7.
That's
and,
awesome.
And this year it is, but that was with teaming up with the business
Yeah.
association.
Yeah,
And doing that focus group type thing, either after.
and through business visitations is how
Yes.
it became so successful, is
Great.
we broke into teams and we went to those businesses and we spoke person to person with all those people, so.
That's wonderful. Yes.
Are you, when you think of that relationship, that teaming concept around tourism, are you thinking of, we're hosting an event where we would hopefully bring visitors to town to participate in something
Right.
for that weekend? But I think there's also an opportunity or a way to interpret what you said, which is, let's bring all the tourism people together on a regular
Yes.
basis
That's
to say, how do we actually raise all boats by doing this cooperative?
Exactly, and I think that's, it's the yin and the yang, you want to do both. So what they're doing on the shoreline town that we're working with is they're bringing those industry representatives together to start talking about some of the things that you're already doing well, which is putting on these events and working with these other neighboring towns. But it is important to get that feedback straight from the horse's mouth of those folks that are doing that business day in and day out. To just understand, again, what are their concerns? What would they want us to be advocating for on their behalf? Or what kind of policies would help them if we could, have the ability to advise our town leaders on some of the policies that might help them, that kind of thing. So you're, of course, acting as that liaison between the business and the town government. If they have a question, who do they go to? You're acting as that single point of contact, probably yourself as the single point. I mean,
Yes, but I would say the whole commission,
yeah.
because we've all have our own little niches,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, we have some members that are in that business,
Yeah.
so naturally they are associated with the others who are in it as their competition, but also their fellow residents and business connections, and so it does work. But I think here it is the whole commission brings a little bit back
I
to
think
the
some of the
table.
projects too.
It's great
have
if
done
it
that.
works well.
Yeah.
That's where, no matter who's calling, they know who to point to, so
Right.
that's the piece that, as long as you all are on the same page about who's gonna get what inquiry or concern, that if you're working together well, then you're really serving as that single point together. A realistic understanding of that data. We talked about so much about data at the beginning. There's other data pieces that I would also encourage you to make sure you're aware of. What are your vacancy rates in retail and commercial and in industrial? Who are your top taxpayers? Who are your top employers? Those major industry pieces are probably not going to change much, but some of those other pieces that I just mentioned may change pretty rapidly. And you want to be sure that you have a good, sound understanding of those numbers, because you're going to be getting calls from prospective investors, prospective developers, and prospective businesses, or who are just frankly going to want to know what is our business community like here? And you all are gonna need to be able to answer those questions. So collect the data and understand it. And then we talked a little bit about that workforce strategy, working with our schools to make the matches between our current employers and the skills and training for tomorrow. So moving on to more components of a successful program. We're marketing to our businesses, right? We're maybe putting out an e-newsletter a couple times a year, or again, we're making sure that they feel appreciated, that they feel recognized. Gee, the town knows I'm here and they care that I'm here and doing well. That's so awesome. So it's just those little touch points that you want to be thinking about, whether it's through social media, whether it's, again, some of those events. But I do encourage a marketing piece that maybe goes out a couple of times a year, whether it's a newsletter, printed, or an e-news. It's an easy way to do like a constant contact, start collecting the business list that you probably already have a good handle on, plug them in, and then be able to e-blast out. You know, here's what's going on in town. We have this RFP that's gonna go out. You know, what are your thoughts on it? Come talk to us, that kind of thing. We talked about the, knowing our legislative delegations. I also always want to point out, Pat in the audience in this case, but I'll always point out our utility rep, because that's another piece that you can really be helpful for your businesses by putting them directly in touch with Pat and her team. If they're really seeking energy efficiency needs and they're struggling, she'll come out with her team at no cost to you or to the business and help them really think through some energy efficiency measures that they can take. Same thing with banks, right? So you probably all know the local bankers, being community leaders yourselves. Just being able to pick up the phone and make a call on behalf of a concerned business who just needs a little technical help, who just has a question about loans, that kind of thing. Make sure that you're using your contacts as senior leaders in the community to be able to help your business community. Of course, tourism here is a big one. So heritage tourism, be thinking about, again, how are we doing? We're putting an event on. We might put a focus group together with the tourism industry representatives. Make sure that, again, that we're advocating for those major industries that are really the bottom line of your local economy. So when we do economic development, it's really what we're doing is we're increasing value in these three ways. We are making sure physically our infrastructure is sound and it's getting better. We're applying for grants, we're putting money into the capital budgets, we're making sure that that infrastructure is really high quality. That is adding physical value to our community. We talked a little bit about the potential developer saying, what are you doing for me? Here I am bringing my investment, what other infrastructure can you match? And that's the kind of thing that we're talking about when we talk about investing physically. Also, engaging socially is really just getting our residents and our businesses to be aware of what's going on and really caring what their input is and what their feedback is. So allowing for those kinds of forums, events, touch points again, whether we're doing a newsletter out to our residents and to our business community, that kind of thing. But we want to engage with them so that we're increasing our social value in the community. And then lastly, of course, economically, really is just about bringing more private investment dollars into our community. So this is where the Land Use Board and Commission members really come in. And we talked a little bit about that reputation in the marketplace and who's making that reputation. But we want to be sure that you all know that we hear from commercial real estate industry professionals on a daily basis, and they tell us that a streamlined land use regulatory process is more valuable to them than anything else, even more valuable than a monetary tax incentive. Because if it's predictable and consistent for them to come into town and get through the process and then get their business up and running, that is everything to them. But that really means predictability and consistency. It means that no matter who answers the phone, the answer is the same. It means that they're getting hand-holding on the front end of the process. They know what to expect. They know what the costs are going to be. You don't necessarily need to have the cheapest costs in the region, but as long as they know up front what's going to be expected of them. They need to know when the meetings are going to be held. They need to know what's going to be expected of them either during a presentation or with deliverable items at those meetings. They want to know what the timeline is, the meeting schedule is, what the costs are, and generally what the process is gonna be. And as long as you're consistent and predictable with that process, folks are going to invest here time and time again. They're gonna come back and do another project, and they're also gonna tell all their friends and colleagues that East Haddam was the easiest place for me to get my project done, so I'm gonna come back here, and I want others to make sure they come here as well. So I'll leave you with this quote. Again, we've talked about economic development as a conscious activity, and our former Yale president says it as well. Really, towns need to be doing both by the same means, acts of choice, and that's really just to say economic development isn't just gonna happen passively, so you gotta be working at it. Any questions? All right, thank you guys. I'll leave it to Bob to finish us up.
Well, yes, thank you, and that's the end of tonight, but we hope it's not the end of a beautiful relationship. Because we would look forward to supporting you and helping you as you move forward. And Emmett, I have a little something for you to hang on your office wall. So this says, and we're going to put it out on social media so everybody will know that you've gone through this process. It's just in recognition of successful completion of this training presented to the town of East Haddam. And Courtney's going to take a little shot of us over there.
Be the social media guru of our organization. Thank you guys.
All right, thank you. Thank you, sir. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. No, very good, Bob. I think
Just a little bit. Every now and then.
Yeah.
I was standing at, yeah.